and greetings from Prashanti Nilayam. This is the second talk in my series on Shirdi Baba. In my introductory talk broadcast last week, I gave you a quick and broad overview of Shirdi Baba's life as I know it. From now on, it would be a more authentic account based on the first-person narrative of Hemat Pant. The original by Hemat Pant is in Marathi, the language spoken in Maharashtra. My presentation is based on a wonderful English translation by Dr. Indira Kher, published first in July 1999 by Sterling Publishers of New Delhi. In this talk, I shall say something about Hemat Pant, whose real name, as I mentioned last time, was Govind Dabolkar. Let me remind you once again that Dabolkar lived from 1856 to 1929 and came to Baba in 1910. He is humility personified and wonders whether at all he is qualified to write an account of the life and the leelas of Shirdi Baba. He says, and I quote, "One may measure the volume of the seven great seas. The wide expanse of the sky may even be covered, but never can the saint be comprehended by the human mind. In my heart I know that I am but an abject human being. But Baba's boundless power and glory create in me an irrepressible desire to sing, which is uncontrollable. Glory to you, O Sai, who are the repose of the poor and the meek. Unfathomable is your love, which simply cannot be described. Be gracious to your humble servant. I sincerely wish to write this account of your life, but I am afraid that I would be biting more than I can chew. Save me from the world's ridicule, I pray." End of quote. Having prayed thus, Hemat Pant acknowledges that in the ultimate analysis, God is always the doer. As he puts it, quote, "In short, it is Sai who is getting his own life narrated through an ignorant fool like me. This is the glory of this story which commands our respect." End of quote. Hemat Pant is conscious that many efforts had already been made by several devotees to propagate the glory of Shirdi Baba. Critics might therefore ask where was the need for one more book. This is Hemat Pant's reply, and I quote, "Das Ganu's miscellaneous poems, also full of deep feeling, will gladden the hearts of readers as they read of Baba's Leelas in them. Amidas Bhavani Das too has narrated with great love and devotion some miraculous tales of Baba in Gujarati, especially for Gujarati readers. Besides all these, some eminent Sai devotees have published from Pune a collection of Baba stories under the name of Sai Prabha. When numerous such works are available, where is the need for this book? So the listeners may well question. Listen now to my reply. Sai's life is a great ocean, boundless, infinite, and a mine of precious gems, which I, a tiny bird, is trying to empty. How can this ever come about? Sai's life is thus unfathomable, which it is just impossible to recount fully and satisfactorily. One should therefore be content to narrate as much of it as one can, and to the best of one's ability." End of quote. One might ask, where at all is the need for such narration? Have not the scriptures prescribed rigorous paths for realizing Brahman? What roles do mere stories have in the quest for Brahman? This, many might recall, has already been answered in Bhagavatam. Hemat Pant simply reiterates this by saying, and I quote, "These tales of Baba liberate the listener from bondage to their karma, bringing enlightenment to their minds and happiness to all without any distinction. Hence a wish arose in my mind to weave together a garland of these variegated tales, so worthy of a collection, so as to make an offering to Baba. This, I felt, was the best form of worship." End of quote. This recalls to my mind what Krishna says towards the very end of the Gita. He says that he who spreads his message is dear to him. And since the Lord's life is always his message, narration of his story and glory would undoubtedly endear the narrator to God. That is the spirit in which Hemat Pant is making his case. Okay, an idea to write a book has taken root in the mind of Hemant Pant. But what about the clearance from Baba? How to approach him and to place the idea before him and how to get his blessings? Pant also had misgivings about his ego. If he did write, would it be Baba who wrote or his ego which furnished him the words? After thinking about this issue for a while, Hemant Pant concluded that if he surrendered his ego completely, then that would solve all problems. He then met Madhavrao Deshpande and conveyed his thoughts to Madhavrao. The game plan was for Madhavrao to sound Baba about the idea of Hemant Pant writing a book. Hemant Pant wanted Baba's direct assurance because there were some factors that were bothering him. This is what he says about his worries and anxieties, and I quote, "I had already crossed the 60-year mark, and at 60, the wicked mind is more prone to create problems and obstacles. Moreover, the feebleness of body might prevent a full-blooded effort, and all that would remain would be an empty babble of words." End of quote. So, as already agreed upon, Madhavrao Deshpande seizes an opportune moment to ask Baba the crucial question. This is how Hemant Pant describes what happened. Quote, "No one else was around at the time, and Madhavrao seized the opportunity and asked Baba, 'Baba, this Anna Sahib, that is Dabolkar, says that he wants to write your life story to the very best of his ability if you will permit it.'" Even as Madhavrao was making his prayers to Baba on behalf of Hemant Pant, he was in the grip of doubts and fears. This is how Hemant Pant describes them, and I quote, "Baba, please do not say I am a beggar begging for alms from door to door, subsisting somehow on bread, with or without grease. Of such a one as me, why do you want to write a story? It will only excite ridicule. Baba, you are a diamond which must be set in a socket. If only you will give permission and extend your help, the book will write itself, or rather you will get it written by me, removing all obstacles on the way." Reading my thoughts, Sai Samarth was moved by compassion and said, "Your wish will be fulfilled." I at once placed my head on his feet. Placing his hand of benediction on my head, he gave me Udi as prasad. Such is this Sai, well versed in all systems of divine faith and the liberation from all worldly ties. Knowing the sincerity of my purpose, words indicative of his consent came from his mouth. "Make a collection of all the authentic stories, experiences, conversation, talks, etc. My own tale I shall narrate myself, and thus I shall fulfill the wishes of my devotee to write my life story. He should subdue his ego and offer it at my feet. He who conducts himself in this manner in life will not only get from me full assistance in the writing of the book, but I shall also toil for him in every way. When ego and conceit are totally resolved, leaving not even a trace behind, it is then that I dwell in him, writing the book with my own hand." End of quote. This last point is a very important one and brings to my mind a story sometimes narrated by our beloved Swami. A saint once invoked Lord Rama's blessings and wrote on palm leaves his version of the Ramayana. One day there was a flash flood, and the hut in which the saint lived was washed away, and along with it all his household goods. The Ramayana too disappeared. The saint was heartbroken, and later when the flood subsided, the saint found that some palm leaves were floating on the water. He patiently collected them and found that they did contain the verses of his Ramayana, but only a small fraction of what he had written. Initially he was saddened by this, but when he carefully studied what was in the palm leaves that had survived, this saint realized that these were the verses actually written by Rama himself. The rest which had been swept away were the products of his ego, and that was why they were removed. This is Swami's story, and there is a clear lesson in all this. Writing the story of the Lord is not a matter of putting pen to paper. If the ego is not eliminated first, then what would result would be a biography of the Lord written by ego. If, however, there is no trace of ego, then what would result would be the story of the Lord written by the Lord himself through the instrumentality of a loving devotee. You will recall that I had mentioned earlier that Hemant Pant's real name was Govind Dabolkar. How on earth did he then get the name Hemant Pant, which he constantly uses throughout the narrative of Shirdi Baba? This is a story in itself and goes back to the time when Dabolkar had his first darshan of Baba. It all started like this. Kaka Sahib Dikshit, a great devotee of Baba, was constantly pressing Govind Dabolkar to visit Shirdi and have Baba's darshan. In the beginning, Dabolkar was not too keen, but eventually agreed, and a date was even fixed for the journey. But it so happened that on that very day, the only son of a good friend of Dabolkar, who lived in Lonavala, roughly halfway between Bombay and Pune on the Western Ghats, suddenly died. This young man was hale and hearty, but was afflicted by a mysterious fever that eventually claimed him. Now this friend of Dabolkar, who lived in Lonavala, was a pious man and had a guru in whom he placed a lot of faith. When the boy was sick, the guru was called, and the guru even came and sat by the bedside. But nothing could have saved the young man from death. When Dabolkar heard the news of the death, he became disillusioned. This is how he describes his mood then, quote, "Why go to Shirdi at all? Just see the condition of my friend. Is this all the profit of a guru's company? What can a guru do before destiny? If what is destined to happen will happen, then where is the need for a guru?" Thus the visit to Shirdi is put off. End of quote. Interestingly and perhaps not surprisingly, the same thing has happened in the lives of many devotees of Swami. As is often said, people come to Swami only when he calls, and he calls only when the time is ripe and the circumstances are right. It happened in my own case. I first saw Swami in 1968 in Shivsagar estate in Worli. But 2 decades had to pass with a tragedy entering my life before it was time for the divine call. Let us get back to the Dabolkar story and how he got the name Hemant Pant. As I told you earlier, Govind Dabolkar had planned on a trip to Shirdi and then cancelled it after he learnt of the death of the only son of his friend in Lonavala. This death caused him to lose faith in gurus, and at that time, not having seen Baba, Dabolkar perhaps thought Baba was yet another of those gurus found in plenty in India. But when the time came, he was dragged to the divine presence. This is how he describes it, quote, "Much as one may wish to the contrary, things and events will come about according to the merit or otherwise that one has earned. Nothing can prevent the working of destiny, and it was this that ultimately dragged me to Shirdi." Nana Sahib Chandorkar, who was a sub-divisional officer, set out from Thane on a tour of Basin and was waiting for his train in Dadar railway station. There was an hour in between for the Basin train to arrive, and Nana Sahib thought he should utilize this time for some useful purpose. Even as he got this impulse, a train going only up to Bandra came to the station, which Nana Sahib then boarded. On reaching Bandra, I received a message from him and went to see him accordingly. End of quote. Maybe I should add a few notes about the train service that Hemant Pant is talking about. Dadar in those days was a suburb of Bombay, and just about 5 kilometers or so from Bandra, another suburb to the north. There was a suburban service from Dadar up to Bandra with reasonable frequency. That perhaps is the service Nana Sahib used to make a quick trip to Bandra. By the way, Bandra is not far from Santa Cruz Airport in Bombay city. Back to Pant and the story of his first trip to Shirdi. We pick up when Pant goes to Bandra station and meets Nana Chandorkar. Chandorkar asks, and I quote, "So, when do you propose to leave for Sai Darshan, and why all this slackness about visiting Shirdi? Why such delay in departure? How is it there is no firmness of resolve in the mind?" Nana's eagerness made me feel quite ashamed of myself. Very frankly, I then told him about the wavering in my mind. End of quote. Nana then gave Dabolkar some much-needed advice that swung the latter around. Nana did more than that. He made Dabolkar promise that he, that is Dabolkar, would leave for Shirdi that very evening. So Dabolkar goes home, packs his bags and goes to Bandra station. Dabolkar's idea was to first go up to Dadar by a local train and then take another train from there to Manmad, a place near Shirdi. Thinking thus, he bought a local travel ticket that would permit him to ride up to Dadar, just a few kilometers away. Dabolkar thought he would buy another ticket in Dadar for the journey to Manmad. So, Dabolkar goes to Bandra station, buys a ticket to Dadar and gets into a train going south. And straight away he runs into a problem. Let us hear that story from Hemat Pant himself. Quote, "As I boarded the train which was still in Bandra, a Muslim swiftly entered my compartment, even as the train was slowly moving out of the station. Like a fly in the very first mouthful of food, my buying a ticket up to just Dadar seemed to augur ill for my journey right at the start. Seeing all my luggage, he, the Muslim, said, 'Where to this journey?' So I replied, 'I will go to Dadar and catch a train to Manmad.' He at once alerted me, 'Do not get off at Dadar. This mail will not halt there. Go straight to Victoria Terminus.'" End of quote. I should add a few more notes again. Well, it does not require much guessing from us to realize that the Muslim who got in at the last moment and gave this advice was none other than Shirdi Baba himself. I must also add that Victoria Terminus, which by the way is a grand building, perhaps a heritage building, is where the GIP railway of those times and the Central Railway of the present has its terminus. All trains coming to Bombay along this railway service, that is GIP in those days and Central Railway now, end at VT, terminate at VT, as it's commonly called. What this Muslim gentleman told Dabolkar was that he might as well catch the train to Manmad from VT itself. The point about the story is how God himself personally facilitates events once we look up to him. How many times Swami has told us, "You take one step in the right direction and I shall take 10 steps towards you." As we see here, this assurance was true when Swami came earlier as Shirdi Baba also. By the way, the year when all this happened was 1910. So, Dabolkar made the connection at VT and next day he landed up in Shirdi around 10 o'clock in the morning. Baba Sahib Dikshit was waiting for him at the Manmad railway station and took Dabolkar by Tonga horse-drawn carriage to Sathya, the only place available then in Shirdi for pilgrims and visitors to stay. However, Dabolkar was advised to have a quick glimpse first of Baba at the mosque, since Baba was soon expected to go to a place called Lendi. So Dabolkar rushes and has his first darshan of Baba and he is immediately bowled over. He then goes to the Vada, Satyavada, the rest house, where he has a bath and later becomes involved in a discussion, an argument one might say. There were some who were of the firm opinion that however proficient one might be in the Vedas, without guidance from a guru, they cannot get deliverance. Without a guru, all that knowledge would be confined to just the books. This is what Swami calls bookish knowledge. Dabolkar held a different point of view. He said, and I quote, "Each one must ultimately strive for himself, and if it doesn't, what can the Guru do? He who only stretches his limbs indolently without so much as lifting a finger, what can anybody give to such a person? Only by one's own effort can one uplift oneself," the Smritis have proclaimed, and it is impossible that by ignoring this, one should cross the ocean of life safely. End of quote. I hope you got the hang of the two opposing points of view. One group held that without the Guru one cannot be redeemed. Dabolkar, on the other hand, held that Guru was not necessary. I am here reminded of the very first line of the bhajan that Swami sang on that important day, 20th October 1940, when he declared himself as the Sathya Sai avatar. Swami said, "Manasa bhajare Guru Charnam." 30 years prior to that, Dabolkar is about to get the same message, but in an indirect and typical Baba fashion. But remember, in this context, the true Guru is really God. Okay, so what happened next? Well, the debate was suspended and everyone went to the mosque to have darshan of Baba. And what is the very first thing that Baba says to Kaka Sahib? What was going on in the Wada? What was all that dispute about? And what was this Hemat Pant saying? He looked pointedly at me as he said this last. Now between the Wada and the mosque, there is considerable distance. How then did Baba know about this incident? I was quite astonished in my mind. At the same time, I was struck dumb by those piercing words and hung my head in shame. The name Hemat Pant that Baba gave me was the direct result of morning's heated disputation, and it must have been that incident that must have reminded Baba of Hemat. End of quote. Dabolkar then gives a brief history of the glory of Maharashtra in earlier times prior to the Muslim invasion. In the 13th century, there was a brilliant man named Hemadri who was not only learned and had written many treatises on Dharma Shastra and various religious matters, but also was a minister to 2 kings. Dabolkar says that the Sanskrit name Hemadri Pant becomes Hemat Pant in Marathi, and when Baba was referring to Hemat Pant, he was meaning really Hemadri Pant of yore. In other words, Baba was in effect asking, who does this fellow think he is? Another Hemadri Pant? That snub was meant as a cure for Dabolkar's ego and also a message that without a proper guru, one really cannot be redeemed. A chastened Dabolkar, now Hemat Pant, became an ardent devotee of Baba and sometime later developed the yearning to write the story of Baba's Leelas. I have already told you all about that earlier. As we saw, Baba blessed the effort, and since Hemat Pant had wiped out his ego, he was given the encouragement. Baba also said to Hemat Pant, and I quote, if my Leelas are recorded, then any sins committed through ignorance would be dissipated, and when these are listened to with faith and devotion, the cares and troubles of worldly life would be forgotten. Whoever sings my praises in a kirtan, to him I shall always give total perfect happiness, peace and contentment, always. He who gives himself up to me with single-minded devotion and sings my praise with full faith, remembers me and contemplates on me, the deliverance of him is my promise. Even if my stories are merely listened to, all the diseases would be cured, and I shall pull my devotees from the jaws of death. End of quote. This is how Hemat Pant, originally Govind Dabolkar, was blessed to record the epic story of Shirdi Baba, earning thereby the gratitude of countless devotees who, though they could not see Baba in person, could nevertheless experience Ananda or bliss by reading about him. Next time I shall tell you about some of Baba's Leelas as told to us by Hemat Pant. I trust you enjoyed what you heard. For my part, I must say that many years ago, I went through the abridged version of Sai Satcharita, the book with the brown cover that we all are familiar with. But reading the more elaborate and better prepared English translation of Dr. Indra Kar has been an inspiring experience for me. It was this thrill that also gave me the urge to share a bit of that through Radio Sai via this special series on Shirdi Baba. Thank you and Jai Sai Ram.
जयाचिति रूपे सगुण निर्गुण ऐसा नारायण बंधु आदि सगुण सेविता निर्गुण ये हाथी निर्गुणाची प्राप्ती आरंभीना आदिमूल काढी कख बारा खडी मग शब्द जोडी झाल्या ज्ञान गणु म्हणे तैसी सगुणोपासना गणु म्हणे तैसी सगुणोपासना अध्यात्माची तिही बाराखडी शिकवी जो गुरु भवाब्दीचे तारू तोच जाणा गुरु सेवा हीच प्रथम पायरी असे टिकण्या भारी अवघड सद्गुरुरायाची कृपा संपादिता सेवेची पूर्तता सहज होई गणू म्हणे केल्या प्रसन्न सविता गणू म्हणे केल्या प्रसन्न सविता प्रभेची न्यूनता केवी पडे